High in the Tibetan plateau where peaks pierce clouds and temperatures plummet below freezing, two climbers stumbled upon something that centuries of expeditions had missed. Marcus Chen and his climbing partner Elena discovered more than a mountain route. They found evidence of an ancient sanctuary hidden within the ice itself. What began as a routine expedition across the Kailash range transformed into an archaeological mystery when an unexpected thaw exposed carved stone walls beneath the glacier. Local guides had warned them about the region, speaking in hushed tones of a forbidden place where old monks had once retreated. But Marcus and Elena pushed forward, driven by curiosity and the undeniable markings they'd found on weathered rocks. As they descended deeper into the mountain's icy chambers, they realized they were racing against time, not against human rivals, but against the mountain itself. The shrine existed, and someone very much alive wanted to keep it buried. Chapter 1. The Thaw. The ice had cracked open like a mouth. Marcus pressed his gloved hand against the exposed stone, brushing away frost with deliberate care. Behind him, Elena maneuvered her ice axe into a secure hold, boots finding purchase on the steep pitch. At 400 meters, the air was thin enough to make thinking difficult. Yet what emerged from the glacier demanded complete focus. "That's not natural weathering," Elena said, her voice distorted by the oxygen mask. "Look at the precision." The carved lines were undeniable, geometric patterns running horizontally across the rock face, too deliberate to be anything other than human work. Marcus had climbed mountains across 3 continents, had studied geology and mountaineering for 2 decades, and had never seen markings like these at this altitude. The patterns resembled Sanskrit, though he couldn't read the ancient language fluently. They'd come to Tibet seeking a new route through the northern face of Mount Kailash, a route that would establish Elena's reputation as one of the finest mountaineers alive. The thaw had begun 6 months earlier than usual, a consequence of shifting climate patterns that rangers at base camp discussed with concern. Snow that should have remained solid until June had begun surrendering to melt weeks ago. It was this accident of nature that had revealed the stone face. "We need to document this," Marcus said, reaching for his camera. The device froze almost immediately. At this temperature, electronics lasted minutes before their batteries capitulated. He managed 3 photographs before the screen went black. The images would be enough. Geometric carvings, deep and precise, suggesting construction rather than erosion. The wind intensified, carrying crystallized air that seemed to cut through their expedition-grade suits. Elena pointed downward along the rock face. The ice had receded enough to reveal an opening, not wide, perhaps 2 meters tall, framed by what appeared to be intentionally worked stone. "There's an entrance," she said. Marcus felt the familiar tightness in his chest that preceded difficult decisions. They had oxygen for maybe 8 more hours at this elevation. The route they'd planned required another 4 hours of descent to reach their higher camp. Exploring would consume time they couldn't afford to lose. "We document and descend," he said, though the words felt like a betrayal of what they'd discovered. Elena nodded, but her eyes remained fixed on the dark opening. Somewhere inside that mountain, sheltered by stone and ice for possibly centuries, something waited. They both felt it. That magnetic pull of the unknown that drew climbers and explorers toward danger. Marcus secured a rope into a crevasse anchor, and they began a careful rappel toward the entrance. The temperature seemed to drop as they approached the opening. Their headlamps cut through darkness that felt absolute, a darkness that had remained undisturbed until moments ago. From somewhere below impossibly came the faint sound of running water. Chapter 2. The Stone Chamber. The entrance was narrow enough to require removing their bulky packs and feeding them through sideways. Once inside, the passage opened into a chamber that defied expectation. The ceiling soared at least 6 meters high, and the walls bore the unmistakable evidence of human labor. Chisel marks, subtle but consistent. Elena's headlamp swept across carved pillars supporting the stone roof. They'd been shaped with precision, their surfaces smooth despite centuries of exposure. At the far end of the chamber, perhaps 30 meters distant, stood what could only be described as an altar. The carved stone block rose from the chamber floor in deliberate geometric forms. "This is at least 700 years old," Marcus whispered, though sound carried strangely in the enclosed space. The technique matches Tibetan monastery construction. Water trickled from above, having found microscopic paths through the stone over decades or centuries. It had carved its own channels down the walls, creating mineral deposits that hung like frozen waterfalls of calcium and ancient minerals. The sound they'd heard outside had been this water, the mountain's pulse, constant and patient. Elena approached the altar cautiously. The floor was uneven, partially flooded with meltwater that reflected their headlamps in disorienting patterns. Objects lay scattered near the stone block, fragments of pottery, what appeared to be offerings long since oxidized. She knelt carefully, examining a small bronze object that hadn't corroded completely. "A prayer wheel," she breathed. Hand worked. Marcus moved toward the walls, studying the carvings more closely. Beside the main chamber, narrower passages branched off into deeper sections of the mountain. He followed one passage about 10 meters before the darkness became absolute, consuming even the reach of his powerful headlamp. The air grew colder. He was about to turn back when he heard it, a sound that didn't belong to wind or water. Movement. Above them, in the darkness beyond their lights, something had shifted. Marcus called out to Elena, his voice sharper than intended. She appeared in the passage entrance, her headlamp joining his to create conflicting shadows on the stone walls. "We're not alone," he said. The realization hung between them. This chamber had been sealed by ice and time. Yet something, or someone, had been here recently enough to leave disturbed dust patterns on the altar, to leave footprints in the mineral deposits near the water pools. From deeper within the mountain, a light flickered. Artificial light. A flashlight or lantern, moving deliberately through passages they hadn't yet discovered. Elena and Marcus exchanged a glance that required no words. They'd found the shrine, but the shrine, it seemed, was actively occupied. Chapter 3. The Watchers. They spent that night in an alcove they carved for themselves using natural formations in the rock. The water provided a constant, maddening sound that masked other noises. Neither slept. Every shadow seemed to move with intention. Every subtle shift in air current suggested presence. When dawn came, though dawn meant only a marginal increase in the darkness seeping through cracks above, they descended lower into the mountain system. The passages became more numerous, suggesting this wasn't a simple shrine but an entire sanctuary. Carved steps descended into deeper chambers, their surfaces worn smooth by countless footsteps spread across centuries. The shrine's organization became apparent. Meditation chambers branched off on either side, each containing stone platforms. Libraries, or what remained of them, held fragments of texts, their pages long since disintegrated into pulp and mineral sediment. Central passages led deeper toward what Marcus recognized as a storage archive. But the most crucial discovery emerged in a side chamber. Recent supplies, dried provisions in modern packaging, a battery-powered lantern partially corroded but functional, bedding that had been used within months, not years. "Someone maintains this place," Elena said quietly. "Someone who doesn't want visitors." They documented everything with their cameras while power remained. The geometric patterns on the walls grew more elaborate in deeper chambers, telling stories in carved stone. Migrations, battles, ceremonies, the construction of the sanctuary itself. This place had been built during the height of Tibetan monasticism, possibly between the 12th and 14th centuries. Marcus found himself calculating timelines. How many monks had worked to carve this sanctuary? How long had it remained occupied? When and why had it been abandoned? As they prepared to ascend and exit the mountain, a sound echoed through the stone passages, unmistakably human. Footsteps. Multiple people, descending from routes they hadn't explored, approaching methodically. If you're enjoying this adventure so far, tell us in the comments where in the world you're watching from. Elena grabbed Marcus's arm. The footsteps drew closer. Whoever maintained the shrine, whoever had left those supplies, now knew they were here. And from the sound of it, They weren't coming alone. Chapter 4. The Confrontation. The passages narrowed as they retreated upward, attempting to reach their entry point before encountering whoever descended. Behind them, lantern light cast dancing shadows on the stone walls. The footsteps became voices, at least 4 people, speaking in Mandarin and Tibetan. Marcus recognized fragments of the conversation, references to outsiders, to the passage, to reporting upstream. They emerged into a side chamber as the lantern light began penetrating the darkness from below. Elena pulled Marcus through a narrow opening, barely a crack in the rock that revealed another passage, this one ascending steeply. Their headlamps caught the glint of rope anchors embedded in the stone, suggesting this path had been used repeatedly. Behind them a shout echoed through the mountain. They'd been spotted. Marcus drove upward through the passage, Elena close behind. The rope anchors provided handholds, evidence that whoever used this route knew the mountain's secrets intimately. The passage twisted and angled, ascending toward cooler air that suggested proximity to the surface. The voices grew louder, more insistent. Someone was climbing rapidly, moving with practiced ease through passages they'd clearly traversed before. Marcus could hear his own breathing amplified in the confined space, could feel Elena's climbing shoes scraping against stone as she pushed for speed. The passage opened suddenly onto a ledge perhaps 3 meters below their original entrance. The glacier had receded further, probably 10 meters or more since they'd entered. The opening they'd used now seemed impossibly high above them. "We climb," Elena said, already surveying the rock face. The stone was partially covered in ice, treacherous but navigable. Marcus secured their rope to a solid outcrop and Elena began ascending. Behind them, the footsteps became louder. The passage would empty into their chamber within minutes. Elena reached the entrance as voices erupted from below. 4 figures emerged into the chamber, their lanterns sweeping across the space. One man pointed directly at Marcus, still 40 meters down on the rock face, exposed and exposed. "Stop climbing," the man shouted in English, his accent marked but understandable. "You've entered a protected site. This area is restricted." Marcus didn't stop. Elena hauled on the rope, pulling with all her strength. His hands found the entrance framing exactly as the first figure began ascending the rope behind him. They tumbled onto the glacier together, the cold shock of the surface air almost disorienting. Without discussion, they began running, skiing on their boots, sliding across patches of ice away from the mountain and toward the distant tents of their base camp. Behind them, a voice called out something in Tibetan. It didn't sound like a warning. It sounded like a report. Chapter 5. The Archive. Back at base camp, Marcus and Elena faced a decision that would define everything that followed. The team manager, a Nepali expedition veteran named Karma, had received a communication on the satellite phone. Someone official, someone with authority, had called to verify whether any of their climbers had entered restricted areas. "They know exactly where you went," Karma explained, his voice carefully neutral. "They know when you entered. They know how long you were below." Marcus showed Karma the photographs from the carved shrine, the geometric patterns, the altar, the evidence of centuries-old construction mixed with modern supplies. "This is an active monastery," Karma said quietly. "The government doesn't acknowledge it. The monastery doesn't advertise it. There's an understanding. This place exists, but it's not discussed outside certain circles." Elena pulled out the bronze prayer wheel they'd recovered. "This deserves to be known. The historical value." "The historical value keeps that monastery intact," Karma interrupted. "Secrecy has preserved it. Outside attention brings bureaucrats, permits, regulations, tourism, everything that destroys what these people have built." Marcus realized then what they'd stumbled upon, not a lost shrine waiting to be discovered and catalogued. A living monastery, actively maintained, deliberately hidden from the world. The men who'd chased them weren't grave robbers or looters, they were guardians. That night Marcus composed a detailed report for himself. Photographs, measurements, observations, the coordinates of the entrance. He encrypted it and stored it on his computer with redundant backups. Not for immediate publication, not for fame or academic credit, but preserved. If this treasure hunt already has you hooked, hit the like button. It helps us bring more forgotten stories to light. The next morning, they broke camp. The climbing expedition was officially concluded. No new route had been established. No records were filed about what they'd found. The mountain kept it secret. But Marcus understood something fundamental about exploration. Some discoveries don't require sharing. Some treasures are more valuable when they remain hidden, preserved by those who have devoted their lives to that preservation. Chapter 6. The Deeper Value. 3 years passed before Marcus returned to Tibet. He came alone this time, with proper permissions and official channels. The monastery, its name finally shared with him, welcomed him formally. The monks who had chased him from the shrine greeted him with ceremony. It had been a test, they explained. Climbers occasionally discovered the entrance. Most turned back immediately, respecting the barriers. Those who ventured inside revealed their true nature. Elena remained in New York, establishing herself as one of the world's premier mountaineers. She never spoke publicly about the shrine. When asked about Tibet, she described only the climbing route, the geological formations, the weather conditions. Her silence was its own form of respect. Marcus had brought something: detailed photographs and measurements, offered freely to the monastery's archivists. The monks accepted them graciously and showed him, in return, the histories they'd been preserving, texts dating back centuries, records of which climbers had discovered the shrine, when, and what choices they'd made. The real treasure, one elderly monk told him, is knowing who would keep the secret. Marcus understood then why the mountain had revealed itself to them. Not everyone who climbs toward the highest places seeks conquest or fame. Some seek understanding. Some respect boundaries. Some recognize that some sacred places remain sacred precisely because they're hidden. The shrine had been preserved through centuries of conquest, religious upheaval, war, and modernization. It would continue to exist as long as guardians like these monks remained dedicated. Marcus's role wasn't to expose it. It was to honor it by choosing silence. As he descended the mountain 3 weeks later, Marcus carried no relics, no artifacts, no records. He carried only memory and the profound knowledge that some adventures end not with glory but with the quiet satisfaction of having protected something sacred. The greatest discoveries, he'd learned, were the ones you never told anyone about. The shrine remains carved into the Tibetan mountain, still sealed by ice for most of the year, still guarded by monks who understand that preservation sometimes demands invisibility. The world will never know its true location, never catalog its exact measurements, never display its treasures in museums. And perhaps that's the most valuable discovery of all: the understanding that not every truth demands to be shared, and that some legacies are most powerful when they remain mysteries, protected by those who understand their worth beyond any monetary value or historical fame.